Hi, I'm Greg Kasavin here to tell you about Painkiller. Painkiller is a throwback to classic first-person shooters like Quake, in which the only goal was to kill everything that moved using really powerful weapons and to watch a lot of blood and guts kind of spray around. And Painkiller does this job exceedingly well. The game does have a plot, though you don't see any of it during the actual levels. After dying in a car accident, along with his wife, Daniel Garner finds himself in purgatory, somewhere in between heaven and hell. An archangel approaches him and tells him that Lucifer's forces are preparing to wage war on heaven and he has to stop them. For some reason, it's just him. So, as such, you'll be permitted to enter heaven and reunited with your wife only if you can take down Lucifer's 4 generals, and, well, that's not really much of a choice, so Dan takes up his nice shotgun and crazy spinning blade thing and goes off to kill himself some demons. But, as you'd probably expect, the plot takes a total backseat to the action. There are no cutscenes, there's no voiceover during the actual missions themselves. It's just running around and killing lots of stuff. Going straight from point to point, no searching for keys, no nothing like that, no nonsense. Purgatory actually isn't such a bad place at first glance. You'll visit a variety of locations such as opera halls and industrial complexes and monasteries. But Purgatory gets its bad rap from its inhabitants, who take the form of everything from weird demonic ninjas and samurai to mad monks to zombies to crazy biker guys and all kinds of unsavory characters, all of whom will be trying to kill you. There are no friendly characters in this game, so just keep shooting at everything that moves and you'll be fine. Though you'll face about 20 different types of enemies, which is quite a lot, you'll notice that they don't have much in the way of complex tactics. They'll either kind of run at you or they'll hang back and shoot at you, though there's some interesting variations, such as these knights you'll fight that will deflect your fire with their shields and fire back with their crossbows. Sometimes you can turn enemies on each other and use some other kind of careful planning and tactics, but for the most part, this isn't a thinking man's game so much. It's a game about lots of pure in-your-face action. Fortunately, you can blast these guys to bits with a bunch of different weapons. While there are only 5 weapons in total, each has a totally different firing mode, effectively doubling the number of weapons to 10. As you'd expect, the weapons come in handy in different situations, and each one has its uses. Some of them are incredibly useful, in fact, such as the combination rocket launcher chain gun, which is probably the single most versatile and powerful weapon in any shooter ever, so this game pretty much puts the power in your hands. Despite the kind of firepower you have on hand, you're going to need it against the game's bosses, which tower above you many stories into the air and are some of the most impressive bosses ever seen in a shooter. These guys are pretty tricky to fight. They make for some very nice and memorable set pieces in Painkiller, and they're much more challenging, in fact, than a lot of the single-player levels actually are otherwise, where you could just blast through all the regular bad guys. These bosses will really give you a run for your money. In general, the combat in Painkiller just has a great feel to it, which, if a shooter is going to do anything right, it might as well be this. There's excessive gore in the game, which looks outstanding, and the game's realistic physics are also very much one of the main attractions, and they're implemented extremely well here, better than in many other games that have started to implement realistic-looking physics. For example, you may have seen ragdoll physics in games where enemies, when killed, kind of flop around like crash test dummies, but in Painkiller, that happens, but also you'll sometimes blow guys into chunks, and you've got this great weapon called the stake gun, which can nail enemies to walls with its gigantic wooden stakes, and all this stuff is happening around you. Things are blowing up, things are getting splintered into shards, there's lots and lots of chaos, and there's lots of replay value as a result because you never really know how a battle is going to pan out twice. As you can see, Painkiller is a pretty straightforward game when it comes down to how you play it, but there are a few twists. For instance, you can turn into a demon if you collect enough souls of your enemies and then rampage around and just blow everybody up even more readily than you otherwise could. Also, by fulfilling certain conditions in the game's levels, you can unlock what are called Black Tarot cards, which you can bring into a level and use them in a pinch to give yourself certain special abilities like slowing down time or giving yourself additional health. Things of that nature. These two create some additional replay value in the single player. Multiplayer Painkiller is so much like Quake that you might wonder what the developers did with that open source code that's been available. It really has the feel of old classic shooters where you're just running around really fast, weapons deal a ton of damage, you're getting killed all the time, but you're respawning instantly and just running around and blowing stuff up. So it can be a lot of fun, but it's also not nearly as complex as some of the popular online shooters these days, like Unreal Tournament 2004 or Battlefield Vietnam. Still, there's something to be said for this stuff, and there's several different modes of play within kind of the general confines of deathmatching. The most unique of them is probably the people can fly mode, where you're bouncing people around and can only kill other players when they're up in the air. So you launch them into the air with a rocket blast and then try to take them out while they're still airborne. The other really cool mode is called Voosh, where every player has the same weapon and unlimited ammo, but after every few seconds, the weapon randomly changes to something else. So you're constantly on a level playing field, but you never really know what you're going to end up with. The game's graphics pretty much speak for themselves. They really get the job done nicely, and considering this is a new 3D engine, it's very impressive technology. So if you're trying to crank your video card to the extreme, this is a good way to do it, and the game runs amazingly well just on the recommended system requirements. It's also got this great heavy metal soundtrack that kicks in whenever you're in action, and basically you'll feel like you're playing a game set in an Iron Maiden album cover or something like that as you're fighting your way through Painkiller. This is a pretty straightforward game. It doesn't do anything terribly complex, but what it does really, really well. So if ever you've liked kind of old school first-person shooters, games like Quake or more recent games like Serious Sam, or if you just want a great game that's kind of a stress reliever and you can just run around and kill a bunch of stuff and get treated to some very satisfying results, you'll find no better option right now than Painkiller.